Okay, in celebration of Thalia being spoiled for Crimson Vow, I wanted to do some videos on death and taxes. So previously I'd done a gameplay video each on two different versions of historic D&T that I'd brewed, and it turns out that they've been actually my best performing videos to date. It's great that there are other D&T fans out there. I love the gameplay of Hate Bears and Silver Bullets since they reward metagame knowledge and they create a lot of interesting in-game decision points and reaction to the opponent. So after taking a break from Historic for a bit, I'm ready to come back. I'll start off with this part 1 video where I look back over what I have been trying and why, and then follow up with a part 2 video evaluating some of the new options for the archetype that have come out since I played last. It seems like there's a lot of exciting new stuff, so I think it'll be a lot of fun. Up through Zendikar Rising, I played D&T in Best of 3 Historic up into High Diamond twice. So I mean, there's still a lot of room for optimization. I'm not the best player of all time, but I do think that it shows that the archetype has some power behind it. So I tried this with both white-blue and with white-black, and took a little dalliance with white-red, though that's better left in the past. It's possible that with cards like Yasharn and Cavalier of Autumn, that there's a case for white-green too, but Azorius and Orzhov are where I spent most of my time. In general, I think that the Azorius version is probably more powerful, but also more delicate to play. So let's take a closer look. So this deck is all creatures with the exception of Kabira Takedown, and I've counted that against the land slots. So to dig into it, let's get these lands out of here, and we'll come back to the sideboard later. So this divides each card into one of 4 primary functions: disruption of the opponent, protection for my creatures, removal, and value generation. So some of these cards have performed better than others, so I thought I'd talk through each and then put them in a tier list from All-Star S tier cards to Cs that I'm looking to replace. I've actually been really happy with Archon of Emeria. The Rule of Law effect is great at maintaining an early advantage, and it stops some combos in their tracks. The non-basic hate is less important, but it can delay a sweeper or a haymaker by a turn against 3-color control. With all this stapled to a nice evasive body, Archon gets an A. Brazen Borrower does provide some rare instant speed interaction, but it doesn't actually add to the board until I can find space to sink in another 3 mana later. Sometimes this is one of the few outs I have in my deck against a larger threat that dodges my other removal, so this can't go too low, but I still have an eye out for a replacement, so I'm going to make this a B. Meddling Mage is a classic that rewards deep metagame knowledge, so getting one or more of these out to turn key cards into dead cards for my opponent can totally win games. The only problem is that it can't reliably stop sweepers, which are a huge weakness of the deck. There are just too many different ones running around in historic main decks. This keeps it out of S, but it's right at home in A. Thalia is the defining card of the D&T archetype. With all the control decks facing me down, no play on 2 makes me feel safer, and she can tangle nicely in combat to boot. She's an easy S. Moving on to protection, the cards here have outsized importance in the Azorius version of the deck, since keeping some key static abilities on the board is critical. So Dauntless Bodyguard is a card that constantly disappoints me. I always wonder if I should be running Selfless Savior, since playing the Bodyguard on 1 leaves it unable to use its ability. However, it being a 2-1 for 1 does put a lot more pressure than the 1-1 dog would, so it keeps hanging around, although it's a B at best. Niambi is a weird one. She's here as a trick that I can leave up to rescue something important from removal, or just come down as a flash piker end of turn if nothing bad crops up. The problem is that she has to sacrifice herself to save something else from a sweeper. So the minor life gain and the ability to pitch extra copies of Thalia and stall games are nice, but I'd rather have something else here, so that makes her a C. Shepherd of the Flock was an experiment to see if it could beat out Niambi in this role. So it does mean that I need to leave up only 1 mana instead of 2, which is a pretty big difference, and it doesn't die when you save something from a sweeper, but it's still not that great, so it's another C. Siren Stormtamer is our last protection card. This can't stop sweepers, but can counter a Thoughtseize in addition to spot removal. It needs mana to activate, but it also comes on an evasive body. So all in all, this evens out to be about the same as Bodyguard at a B. Moving on to removal, Deputy of Detention does a lot. It can hit threats of any size and type, and it can be devastating against tokens, especially when you pair it with Flicker. The times that you grab multiples of a card at once push this all the way up there to an S for me. Skyclave Apparition has made an impact across formats, so it's not surprising that it's great here as well. So many things you want to hit have mana value 4 or less, and giving a vanilla token back instead of the real threat once the opponent does deal with the apparition is a game changer for this kind of effect. Occasionally you can even abuse the old-style Oblivion Ring wording to double up your value with Flicker or Self-Bounce. I'd say it's another easy S. Kabira Takedown can pretty reliably kill mid-sized creatures, and sometimes can even reach up to like 6 damage or so at instant speed. Also, it doesn't have to meet the same bar as the other card since it is taking up a land slot in this accounting, so this pushes it up to a B for me. Finally, we have value cards, starting with Charming Prince. This card does a lot. Dropping it on 2 to smooth out your draws is great, but it can do a lot of tricky things with its flicker mode as well. It can let you change what's under a deputy or an apparition, it can change what's named by a meddling mage, or even what bodyguard is protecting or what Glasspool Mimic is copying. Sometimes the 3 life is clutch as well. So much versatility makes it an A. Elite Guard Mage is here as straight up card draw on an evasive body to top out the curve. It also serves as a prime flicker target for Prince. There are a few similar creatures that could be here, but so far I found that the life gain here is relevant. I wouldn't be surprised if this was outclassed in an upcoming set though, so I'm going to put it in B tier. Glasspool Mimic can do a lot of cool things in this deck and can help out with land problems. However, its versatility is offset by being a poor early play or after a sweeper. Those weaknesses maybe put it in B, though it's possible that it edges into an A. Mangara is a 4-mana card that I've been trying out as a one-of just to see how it performs. I've actually been pretty happy with it. So this provides some nice hate against usually aggressive decks where the 2/4 body with lifelink is actually really solid, and it can sit back and draw me cards when they're actually trying to be aggressive. So altogether, I'd say that makes it an A for now. The Orzhov version is literally all creatures with a similar curve. The roles, however, are slightly different. We still have disruption, removal, and value, but protection has been replaced with dedicated aggression slots. In general, more of the black creatures generate their value on ETB versus the blue ones that need to hang around to provide a static ability, so protection isn't as important here. We've already talked about Archon of Emeria, and it still gets an A in this version as well. Brain Maggot shows Black's take on disruption through attacking the opponent's hand. Being able to know if a sweeper is coming up and possibly delay it until some other removal is burnt on the maggot is powerful, but a 1/1 on the ground doesn't really get to attack that much. This puts it in the B range for me. Kitesail Freebooter plays a similar role, but trades off being unable to take creatures for a much more relevant body. Since most of what we want to disrupt is removal anyway, that's a good trade, so it comes in at an A. Thalia is still here, and Thalia is still great, so let's slide her to S. Midnight Rider has the same issue as the adventure creatures in the Azorius version, but Swift End actually permanently affects the board instead of just being a tempo play, so it helps a lot. Add in the lifelink on the body, and Rider gets to be an A. As before, Skyclave still provides a lot of value, so it maintains its position in S. Sometimes Ravenous Chupacabra is exactly what you need to 2-for-1 the opponent and take care of a large creature. Flicker it even once, and it starts to become absurd. Although it's basically dead against control, it's so good elsewhere that I put it in at A. Acquisitions Expert is one of the more underwhelming cards in the deck. There have been many times that I've been able to strip an opponent's hand down with these and some flickering, but the body is really underwhelming. Having some permanent discard options is nice, but I'm hoping for a replacement in this slot, so that makes it a C. I find that Basilica Bellhaunt performs better than it should. It also gives permanent discard, and plays nicely with Flicker, essentially being the Orzhov answer to Elite Guard Mage. It ends up in the same B slot as well, mostly since 4 mana is a lot. If anything, Charming Prince is better in this version since there are more ETB value triggers to Flicker. It stays put in A. Similar to Mangara, Gonti is a 1/4 drop that I've been trying. They provide some ETB card advantage with selection and can always trade up against a big creature, but I'm not convinced that it justifies the price. I leave them in B for now. Similar to Kabira Takedown before, Black Bloom Rogue is counted against land slots, so the grading bar is lower. This can certainly be an evasive threat, but the ability is anti-synergistic with a lot of the graveyard hate options that we have, so this still just sits at C for me. Gutterbones here serves the same 2-1-for-1 role that Dauntless Bodyguard does in the Azorius version. Since protection is less important, Gutterbones can provide a potential party power-up to Acquisitions Expert, and can lessen the sting of sweepers as long as it hasn't been stopped by our own graveyard hate. I'd still rather do more here though, so this is also a C. Knight of the Ebon Legion is simply here as a very efficient and potentially game-ending threat for only 1 mana. It's amazing how often I see this eat premium removal, either because it's already gotten out of hand or the opponent is just afraid that it's going to. That makes it an A. Nighthawk Scavenger also provides a lot of stats for only 3 mana. It's evasive, great in a race, and can also serve as removal by blocking something big. However, it's also hurt by our own graveyard hate, but at worst it just drops it down to 1 power, so it's not totally irrelevant at that point. Altogether, that makes it a B. Death and Taxes is an archetype that cares a lot about its sideboard, so that it can shift in the correct silver bullets to adapt to what the opponent is doing. There's a lot of overlap in the sideboards of each version, so let's take a look at them together. Starting off, Containment Priest appears as a 2-of in both versions' sideboards because it's so good against things that the deck is weak to, mainly shutting down Muxus and Collected Company. It also messes with flicker effects like Yorion, or even as a combo with our own Deputies of Detention to keep whatever they had detained from coming back when they die. It's also effective against some popular graveyard recursion, so altogether that makes this a very versatile hate bear. Devout Decree provides efficient exile-based removal against a variety of popular must-kill threats, as well as helping shore up the deck's general weakness to Gruul. I run 2 in Azorius, but I swap out the second for a Mortify in Orzhov to give some play against enchantments. Shark Typhoon in particular isn't hit by Skyclave Apparition, so this can be a useful out. Drannith Magistrate serves as another versatile hate piece. Magistrate stops the creature follow-up for adventures, stops popular impulse draw options including expressive iteration, and it stops various play from library and play from graveyard effects. It also shuts down some powerful control finishers that are trying to cheat things into play. In Orzhov, I swapped the second Magistrate for Kaya Orzhov Usurper. I admit I have a soft spot for this card, but Kaya can serve double duty as both general purpose graveyard hate as well as spot removal for a number of low-cost problem cards. Her ult is also totally practical, and its extra reach has won me games, even activating it multiple times on stalled boards. Dust to Dawn is a card I've been experimenting with to help deal with Gruul or green-based midrange, since they give this deck so much trouble. The front side can be a one-sided Wrath against those decks, and the backside hits most of my things, helping to restock in long games. I haven't gotten enough playtime with it yet to decide if it's worth the valuable slot, but it's in here for now. Leyline of Sanctity is great at stopping popular targeted discard from picking my hand apart. It also comes in handy against some less common matchups like Burn, and occasionally you can use it to do something tricky like stopping a Settle the Wreckage. Rest in Peace is the definition of a silver bullet. Even with Uro gone, there are so many decks that want to use the graveyard as a resource, and this can stop them both preemptively or even once they've already gotten started. It does interfere with some of my own cards in the Orzhov version, but I count that as an issue with those cards, not Rest in Peace. Each version also includes a creature for a little more graveyard hate, with Remorseful Cleric for Azorius and Kanoros for Orzhov. Kanoros doesn't shut down cards like Dragon's Rage Channeler that want to count the graveyard for effects, but it still hits most things and it packs some stats to boot. Solemnity is another card that I love because it totally hoses some pretty diverse strategies. I've gotten great value pulling this in to stop Nissa's infuriating +1, especially when the opponent doesn't realize and sacks a land to it first. It also nullifies sagas, cuts off life gain decks, and blunts small creature strategies that want to grow over time. And while the opponent still gets the best part of Hydrate Krasis, they will lose out on the body, which is some small victory. I smile every time I bring this in. Unsurprisingly, Vryn Wingmare is good anywhere that Thalia is great. That includes any deck that's reliant on chaining small spells like Arclight, and it can also provide meaningful delays for big control finishers and the artifact ramp that some decks use to reach them. Thalia into this can make it so that those opponents can't even get their feet under them before you've totally run them over. On the Azorius side, I've also been playing with Fight as One as a way to save, usually, 2 creatures from a non-exile Wrath. There are just so many Wraths in Historic, and they hurt this deck so badly that I'm always looking for counterplay. I think some newer sets have added better options though, so I'm excited to explore that. I also was trying out Confounding Conundrum while Uro was still running rampant. I've really only seen this do its job once though, and with Uro gone, I think this slot is open to try something else. Over on the Orzhov side, I've also been trying out a Necromentia. I really like this style of effect. Like, it may actually just be my favorite effect in the game, and I think this is a pretty good version of it. Some decks will just straight up concede to a Necromentia when they're built around one big payoff, and banning something like an Ugin that I just have to concede to gives a lot of breathing room. Finally, Witch's Vengeance has been another way to effectively get a one-sided Wrath against the right opponent. Both elves and goblins give this deck some trouble, and this can deal with both, although if the elves' opponent gets going too fast, their lords can put them out of reach. Occasionally, another tribal deck like Merfolk shows up too, and you can be ready for them. Hopefully that was an interesting dive into two different takes on the D&T archetype. I'm sure there's a lot that people could disagree with, so if you have any suggestions or you think there's something I've missed or should try out, take it to the comments section. Remember, this is part 1 of 2, and in the next video I'll be evaluating some of the new cards that have been released and seeing what might deserve a spot in my deck lists. So if you enjoyed this, make sure to check back for that. Until then, thanks for watching.